Stay right there. What are you waiting for? Kill them! Kill them both! No, wait a minute. Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want.
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
I think it's a poetic device. I think there's something very interesting about that. It's like compounding words that aren't necessarily words, and it's juxtaposition, but it's also looking for the sort of interstitial relationship between the two things, if there even is one. And maybe that's sort of the point. I can see that is kind of how you approach poetry, at least I think you do. Maybe you should explain it.
Well, I'm a poet, a Canadian poet and author. My name's Dustin Cole. Yeah, I just had a book come out this year called After Sunstone, published by Farthest Heaven. That's a newer press, based in St. Louis, Missouri, ran by a gentleman called William Ballard, and co-edited by a gifted, prolific poet, Tom Will. And so I knew these guys from Apocalypse Confidential. They both edited for Apocalypse Confidential, and I had published quite a bit there. And then I kind of retired from online publishing, but making books is still a priority of mine. And they had reached out to me wondering if I had anything. And so last year, that's when the process of this book started, with a manuscript, and eventually came out, I think, in March of this year. So, yeah. And I've written I have a couple novels published too, but I'm not really doing that anymore. Not really writing long form fiction anymore at the moment anyway. So I'm just more or less focused on shorter forms like poems, essays, stories. And you were talking a little bit about juxtaposition. It's interesting to me how these kinds of things go together, or can be presented together, thought of together, both in separate forms or with combining forms. Combining forms like next to one another, or combining forms together in one piece. So all that kind of stuff is sort of basically what I'm interested in these days as a writer, as a poet. So yeah, and I just want to, I was happy that you asked me to do this, because I just want to promote this book. It turned out so nicely. You know, I'm really proud of it. So I want to sell more copies.
I totally agree. I totally agree.
But
No, sell copies. It's fine. It's fine. Everybody knows
I love
totally fine.
royalty. I love royalty payments, you know. Anyway, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with everything. not on Twitter as a writer. Don't really think it's goes together very well, but other people think it does, and that's fine. But yeah. So
I treat it totally experimental. Just like if I'm feeling it, something will maybe come out. If I'm not feeling it, then I just don't post. That's pretty much how it goes for me. If it's in the moment, then I can maybe come up with something.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But you
So
said something really, oh, sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask about, you were saying like you prefer the shorter form expressions, but not necessarily just limited to poems. Maybe it's a little bit longer form essay, but I also noticed this, there is a sort of overlap between certain poetic styles and long form, maybe essay nonfiction. Like there's ways you can incorporate poetic device into those if you're skillful. I'm not saying I'm skillful. I'm saying you're skillful. And so I see that you're able to like expand and contract what is would be, I guess, the normative consideration for what poetry is. And you're saying you're preferring that now. Can you just go into maybe why that is, or what is the difference in your sort of method now? Like why are you making a conscious choice to choose shorter form?
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, essays are short forms too. Like poems might be quite short, just a few lines, but some of them can be fairly long too. I just because I'm just comparing like essays, stories, poems to novels. Like to me, a novel is a long form. It's a lot different. There's the way that you build up energy and associations in a novel and remain cogent is completely different. But to me, essays, stories, and poems are much more the same or similar. And the reason I think so is because they just it's like what my friend said once, Aaron McSavany. He's a really brilliant painter. He's like a photorealistic painter. And he said to me one time, he had this quite a small painting set in Vancouver in an alley, with some foliage sort of growing around a garage wall and, a gate. And it was just stunning, really. And he's like, yeah, that wouldn't really work big, that wouldn't really work 3 feet by 3 feet or whatever. It's just not the same energy. And it's the same thing to me, with poems and essays and stories. They just they associate within themselves more closely, in proximity to different kinds of images and ideas and things. And they just have a different kind of dense energy to them, which I don't think novels really do. Novels, I think, do different things, and you can get some of that also in a novella or like a short novel, but it's not really the same. And so I've just been more interested in that. And then also how you can kind of combine them, like you can take things you do in a poem and, do them in a story, or you can versify an essay, one paragraph, one paragraph is one sentence, and it kind of becomes versified and cadential in the same way that a poem does. And so those are just a few little examples of how it's, to me, pretty exciting to explore. And I've only kind of started doing this in earnest recently, like in the last year or year and a half or so, and wanted to. I was kind of burnt out on novel writing, and I think it's kind of like manual labor. Like you're just kind of like churning out pages, and it's not always that fun, and it's not always that interesting. You're just sort of recording ideas that need to be there to make the narrative cogent, um, and make sure it doesn't contradict itself if you're like making naturalistic fiction. And so these types of like almost like chores or this kind of labor that was involved in it stopped being fun to me. I no longer was that interested in it. And, but I still really very much want to keep making books and keep writing, and reading. And so I just kind of, I sort of pivoted away from that. Yeah. So that's like basically what I could say about all that in a nutshell. I could go on and on really, but I mean,
I thought that was great. I was like, I'm eating up. This is like exactly, it's my own private MFA course, so I'm here for it. That's
yeah.
no problem at all.
Well, someone should hire me for, an MFA workshop. I could use the work.
I agree. I agree. And you live near quite a few, so definitely they should hire you. I agree.
Can I
So
ask you something quickly, Jin?
sure, absolutely.
Are you American or Canadian?
I'm actually both, but I'm Canadian.
Okay.
Like
do you mind me-
I've like lived here my whole life, pretty much. Like I've lived in Asia before and I've lived in the US, but pretty much
Okay.
I'm Canadian.
So do you mind me asking like whereabouts in
Oh,
Canada you're
that's totally
based?
fine. So I'm originally we were one of those I'm sure you know them, Dustin, is the people who live in Vancouver and Toronto. They're kind of like they switch every few years or whatever. That's the kind
Yeah.
of family that I come from. My dad's Asian,
Okay.
so like
Okay.
Chinese, obviously. So yeah, we're like one of those, and we kind of lived all over. But I live on the
Okay.
all the way opposite coast. But I left Toronto during COVID. That's basically my story for podcasting too.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. I'm from Alberta. I'm here right now. I lived in Vancouver for about more than 15 years. And, yeah, I just got back to Canada. Like I was in Mexico for 7 months. And so, yeah, I was just curious, like, because you've been you sometimes post things that are like Canada centric. I've seen
Yes,
in the past. And,
absolutely.
I was just curious where you were from. Cause a lot of my literary contacts are American,
Mhm.
some from Australia. Yeah, but like many American contacts. So I was just curious. And, many Americans will probably listen to this because of my contacts. So that could be good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is the thing, Dustin, is like I'm proud of where we're from. Like I don't
Yeah.
necessarily like its formation, but if you understand like what Canada is and what it looks like and the different contours of it, it's an incredible place. And this might actually be a perfect time, what you brought up, to transition to something you mentioned in your interview with the BC Review. I know this was a long time ago. You probably don't remember it, but the interviewer asked you about the locality, like the fictions of locality or locality in fiction. And you gave
Yeah.
a really great answer. And I think this is actually a fundamental sort of Canadian question and also like about our own methods of art production. I think it's
Mhm.
very much tied into the place that we live. And I think this is obviously goes to like Rachel Carson and like I'm forgetting the name, but
Group of
the group
seven.
of seven, exactly. I
Yeah.
apologize. Yes, thank you. But I think all Canadian sort of art has this sort of these themes of like place, nature, and like what is the reality in post-modernity kind of, at least in my memory, because that's sort of when I was born. So
Mhm.
I want you just if you want to sort of go into that and talk about if what I said even has any meaning or relevance to your work, but also your thoughts on Canadian literature or art more generally.
Okay. Well, it's a good question. Like, I can speak to it in different ways. Like, for example, in my own fiction, like like my first two books, my the two novels I've had published, Notice and Run the Bead, they are based in Canada. You could call them Canadiana, like, and so when I wanted to be when I wanted to write naturalistic fiction and like write contemporary novels, that was, you know, a really, I thought like having my experiences being Canadian was a good entry point for me into writing that kind of fiction, like with some other influences, like informing the aesthetic. I thought it would be interesting to combine that. Cause like I was really into like Eugene Martin and cause Eugene Martin is like, I think he's underrated. He's probably the best living American novelist. No one really talks about him that much in like indie lit, online indie lit. And like I kind of kept him a secret when I was wanting to write fiction, because like I didn't want anyone to like really pinch my source, my aesthetic source. But now that I'm not really doing that, it's all good. But like I think that he should sell more books too. And he's actually born in Canada. His parents are European, but they emigrated to that Winnipeg. And then they had Eugene, and then they moved down into, I think, Ohio. No, yeah, I think Ohio, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, and then like I was into Bruce Chatwin and stuff like that, and I love Chatwin, and so I was like, how do I like do something with these really cool novelists I love that are, I guess maybe Chatwin is quite a lot more famous than Martin, but Martin has got his due too. And like, how do I combine these kinds of aesthetics I love with like Canadian stuff? And so that's what I did, for a while. For a good 5 years, I was hammering away, like on that kind of stuff. And then, as I reviewed some Canadian books. There's a really cool Canadian author. His name's Grant Boudet. I think he's based on I think he's somewhere like on one of the Gulf Islands. I don't know where, but he's really good. No one really knows about him or talks about him much, and he's just, he's just kind of like, I don't think he teaches creative writing or anything. He basically manages a recycling center. But like, I reviewed this book by him called Atomic Road, which was like a kind of like basically like it was a historical fiction. It was not a long novel, fairly short. And it was like, one of the characters was the famous art critic. I believe his name is Clement Greenberg. He was very, very instrumental in like popularizing abstract expressionism. During, in the Cold War era, and, abstract expressionism was like a kind of a propaganda tool in the Cold War era. And so this book by Boudet is about like these, him, Clement Greenberg, and a philosopher, a French philosopher. The name is escaping me, but they go on this like road trip, and then there's this like spook trying to like basically shadowing them, and it's like kind of like a madcap sort of like historical novel, like Cuban Missile Crisis is like looming in the background. It's good. And so I was like, holy shit, like there's some real Canadian, like there's some There's some good Canadian authors hiding in the woodwork. I'll tell you that. I don't really read Atwood or anything like that. My favorite Canadian fiction writer is Alistair MacLeod. He's a maritime guy. Awesome, amazing writer. Some of the best short stories I've ever read are MacLeod stories. And then, of course, you've got the lovely Leonard Cohen, and his poems and songs are wonderful. So like Canada has no shortage of talent. Like it's a little different up here. I think we depend on the government too much. I think the literary world in Canada depends too much on Canada Council grants, whereas in the States, there's a lot more do-it-yourself indie lit, just writers, editors, readers making books without the government's help. So, yeah, I don't know. It's good. I like Canada. And for as far as place goes, in my book After Sunstone that came out this year, there's a lot of place, I guess you would say, oozes out of it without even really trying. Wasn't thinking, oh, I want to write place-based poetry. It's just how it is, like I don't know, you're tied to the land, it's just the way it is. I don't think you can really get around that. So anyway, those are like, I place in literature is so interesting to me. I could go on and on about it. Like that's like a sort of can of worms. That's a good question.
I appreciate that. I think you did a great job of fielding it. I mean, you can go more into that. This is also one of my favorite topics, just generally. I think it's something that interests me in terms of for more esoteric reasons, but I think it's speaking to the same thing. I don't think there's any discrepancy in terms of like being located in place, arising in place, your consciousness arises in place, sort of interacting with the place and the spaces around you. Obviously, this is that a lot in terms of what they talk about in Canada is a lot about these kinds of like relational kinship treaties with the land, and like it doesn't have to be an indigenous, like it doesn't have to be about indigeneity. It can just be like we're people who live on the land, so maybe we can just look at it through that lens. We don't have to use the specificity of the culture it comes from. So this is something I think about and talk about. Yeah, sometimes I'd say, but it's definitely something on my mind lately.
Well, I think like the indigenous peoples of Canada are good. I think they've done well to prompt the conversation, I mean, if it means something for them, why wouldn't it mean something for anybody else? And I was going to ask you one thing, Jin, like you said, this idea or concept of place in literature or something, or place in the person. You said for you, it's a little more esoteric. Would you mind explaining that to me a little more? That's interesting to me. Like how so?
Absolutely. So I don't know if you know this, Dustin, but I'm a tantric Buddhist. So
Okay.
we believe that, like, okay, so basically we're not normie Buddhists in any capacity. It's very different. But
Okay.
we believe that there are nature spirits outside of us, land spirits, maybe greater land spirits, genus loci, if you want to call them like a more Greco, like Latinate name.
Okay.
So we believe all that exists. And we also believe we don't call it a treaty, we call it karma, but it's very similar kind of thinking. I can tell it's referring to something similar. So for me, we want to make sort of relational treaties with those quote unquote spirits, but those spirits are also a reflection of your own mind. There's a direct dialectical relationship between the quote unquote supernatural phenomena and how they arise, and your state of consciousness. Now, it might not be one to one, meaning that the being, spirit, God, land, entity, whatever it is not necessarily from your mind 100%, but largely it is a reflection of it. So if you can sort of tame your own mind and do certain practices, it will help tame the land as well. And so my exposure to sort of like the indigenous ideas of like medicine wheel or Sundance or even ghost dance, which they still, I think, practice sometimes near you. Uh, they, the idea is to bring the land back into relation, but it's not just about the people. It's really about. This took me a long time, Dustin, to really get it. I had a lot of
Mhm.
elder, like I had Cree elders explain it to me, and they would always emphasize, especially, and this is not a slight to women or Cree people or anything, but they would always emphasize the communitarian aspect. But
Okay.
actually, when I got a little older, someone else explained it to me, a man, and he wasn't really he's not really a medicine man. He's like a professor at UT and like an older guy. He wasn't really a professor. He's like an elder in residence. And sorry, I couldn't think of it. And he said that it is more about relational to the person, because if the person is sick, the land is going to reflect the sickness. And so to bring it into harmony, into balance, that is the true sort of essence of Sundance. That's how it was explained to me. Maybe I apologize, but that's my understanding of it. And so this makes sense in a Buddhist way. This makes sense in a Kabbalistic way. You want to bring everything into synthesis. You don't want to aggregate heat. You don't want to aggregate inferior perceptions, you could say.
Mhm.
So this even speaks to how you structure your poems. This is something that I noticed right away.
Okay.
And you brought it up, how the words relate to each other. So you saw in your earlier book of poems, you wrote, you were playing with a lot of different structure, a lot of different aesthetic forms of the words on the page. Now, I noticed this, but maybe other readers don't necessarily notice. But doing like the sort of the three-tier structure, which I'm also very fond of, I think is really one of the most interesting sort of like if you're going to play with like a more formalized structure, because you can actually cut the words or cut the sentences off to make your sort of three-step pyramid in different ways. And you can have words next to each other that wouldn't necessarily appear next to each other. So that is also really what I'm also talking about. It's like, how are things brought into relation in grammar? And so ritual sort of methodologies can also be thought of as grammar. And
Mhm.
since the word is of such primary and fundamental importance in all esoteric or wisdom science traditions, that you must also say that the poet has maybe direct access to the word, and then the form that he puts it in is kind of his, if you want to say, spell.
Interesting.
I don't
Yeah,
know. Maybe that was too far,
no,
but
I really no, I think no, this is what I think this is the kind of thing that I find interesting in different readings of poets. That's the interesting part of it. Like I don't hear a lot of different ways of thinking about poetry. Um, like there's such thing as creative writing, but there's also such thing as creative reading. And so what I notice a lot is like people just trying to summarize stuff, just say what it's about, you know, at the lowest, like what is the most, people seem to ask, like, what is the most obvious thing, about this that we can say for sure? And to me, it's like a really pedestrian way to read poetry. Like I said, we should be creative readers too. And like to me, what you just said is more like creative reading. Um, I was thinking, I think that poetry is and I'll try to bring this back to what you said about the words or the poem being a spell. To me, poetry is there's a it's mystical. There's a mysticism in poetry. And maybe I've like not set. Maybe I've brought this up before and not explained myself very well, but I think I could probably explain it in a more straightforward way now. And what I would say is that it's mystical, or there's a mysticism about making poems insofar as you don't know where it's coming from and you don't know where it's going. And to me, that's like one of the things about mysticism. You know, there's like you're trying to, there's something before you and beyond you. There's something after you and beyond you. And that's not, I mean, there's different ways to explain it. There's different kind of religious systems to explain it. And I think that like poetry is one way of dealing with that issue that every human being faces, you know. It doesn't matter if you're religious or not, you know, like, and the thing about a spell, you know, what is a spell? You know, to be enchanted. Well, certainly a good poem enchants me, you know, like, and because it's a compact textual form, the relation between sound, semantics, or like meaning, parts of speech, and the bending of parts of speech, all of this, it's all compact. It's all highly energized and can be very enchanting if done well. Or if even done well, maybe that's not the right way to say it. Like, I don't know, like, it's hard to know like why sometimes a poem is good or why a certain poet could do it a certain way. You know what I mean? Like, that's a pretty complicated issue, but there's no question that can be certain poems to certain people at certain times can be absolutely enchanting, you know, no question. So like, I don't know if I'm like going at this the same way you would, or you are, but the things you say bring to mind stuff that I've been thinking about, which I think is awesome, that like we're able to jump right into this. Like, even though we're not like on the same pathway, you know, necessarily in what we're thinking about, what we're reading and stuff like that, or what we're dedicated to, there's still plenty of overlap, which I love, you know, so I don't know what else to say now.
Well, if you love the word, you can understand it in its many splendors, maybe. So even though we don't speak exactly the same language on, like, I'm not a literary critic or like, you know, a writer of your caliber, but because I maybe am a creator or a reader, maybe that's a perfect way to describe it. I would call myself like a Kabbalistic, sort of like noticer, or maybe just you know, I look for the metaphysics, the deeper metaphysics. That's not always about magic, obviously, but a lot of times it can describe maybe things that are extrasensory phenomena. So that's kind of what I look at when I look at, especially words. Words are very profound to me. I've talked a little bit about this. I'm not trying to, you know, say anything weird, Dustin, but there's since 2020, I've experienced synesthesia with words. So sometimes certain
Okay.
words will be of specific colors for me.
Okay.
And so that's kind of how I read. I know that's going to sound really weird, but that is the truth. And I think I've long experienced it, but I think I only began to really see what it meant, or what it was, at least after COVID. That's just my experience, though.
No, that's really interesting to me, because like, well, I was reading something recently. So you know that this is Pascal Quignard. I was reading this book by him, and he was mentioning that like in Greece to this day, moving vans have the word metaphora. So metaphora. In Greek, metaphor means to move, to shift. And so whether you're talking about like and whether you're talking about a synesthetic reaction to a word, or, you know, like a word being, you know, the word bird being, you know, not just to denote the bird, the animal, but also a symbol for something, you know, like metaphors or transpositions of signs are a kind of moving. You're moving something from one place to another in your mind, I think. And so what does that do? You know, like what does that can do all kinds of things with, you know, to a text and to a person who is the audience of the text. You know, like yeah, I think it's easier to understand in painting or
Yes.
in film.
Film is a great one. Film is a really great one because it's easier because there's sound, there's light, the colors are very
Yeah.
vibrant. It's a lot more
Yeah.
obvious. So that's a
Yeah.
starter. Start with film. I 100% agree, Dustin. That's the way.
And,
Start with film.
but
But if you can do it, then words may become alive too.
they do. And like writers that's what they deal with. That's their material, right? Is language. And so they do it with words, but it's much more, it's illustrated more clearly or obviously in painting and film, but it's happening the same way in texts or in language. So yeah, these things are like, rather than be able to talk about them with any authority, for me, all this stuff is kind of just, I'm still thinking about it and making work related to it. And so I'm like still at this like kind of this stage in understanding that's a little more experimental, you know, and I suppose like if you could call, if I could be considered experimental in any way, that would be what it is. It's not like coming up with strange forms or new forms or doing bizarre things with language or anything. It's just more experimenting with new realizations or something like that and what they mean. You know, and that I think poetry is great for that. That's to me why it's so exciting.
I agree. Poetry is
Because
for me very exciting as well. Sorry, Dustin, I didn't mean to cut you off. But I just want to say that there is a kind of what you're saying is really interesting to me because I would like to think of myself as like in that conceptual frame that you're talking about. Like I like to treat everything as conceptual and sort of talk about it, explore why it is, explore how it is, you know, like see, is it an ontological thing that we're talking about? Is it a cosmological thing? Can it be mapped to something? That's how I like to live. For me, I'm just saying that.
Mhm.
But yeah, I totally, I 100% am on that same wavelength. I feel you.
Yeah, and like lately it's been really interesting for me because now that I'm like, well, when this book came out, I did a kind of a talk, like a presentation rather than a reading, like it included readings, but it was called Poetry of Silence. Because for me, like poems and poetry is silent. There's no sound. And like, whereas a lot of people emphasize sound, because it's verbal, but I don't read my poems out loud when I'm making them or editing them or anything. And I don't read other people's poems out loud when I'm, I don't, and when I'm have a book open. That can be interesting, but it's not really part of what I'm doing. But it still doesn't mean that sound, if I think poetry is silent, or there is a poetry of silence, for me at least, I still don't think that I can't discredit sound as being of interest in poetry. And so, like, I've been thinking, okay, so what comes first, image or sound? How do they go together? Or do they go together? If they go together, when? If they don't, when not? Or so just that's another one little example. Or another one is like, okay, so the idea of voice, a poetic voice. Okay, so I don't really believe in a poetic voice. I don't think that's real. And someone would maybe argue, they would say, well, when this so-and-so reads their poem out loud, I am able to understand it more deeply or more clearly, or there's things that I noticed that I didn't notice before. Yeah, that could be true, but does it mean that that is that poet's voice? And I would argue no. And the reason why is because first of all, we share a language. So say it's in English, say the poem's in English, we share a language. Okay, well, that's a collective treasury, of words, terms, sounds, all that. Okay, so that's a collective thing. That's not individual. And then what about, oh, well, I've got the poet has a certain style. Okay, well, where did they get the style? They had to have gotten it from somewhere or combined different sources in order to get a quote unquote style. Or what if they're working with forms? Like, what if they're working with sonnets or different, or like blank verse or different metrical forms? Well, they are collaborating or they're basically maybe collaborating, but perhaps even less. They are kind of surrendering their own voice or style to a form. So there's all kinds of things. There's all kinds of problems with the idea of sound in poetry and the idea of voice in poetry. I think it's interesting. And I think there's like arguments against what I'm saying, but for me, it's like just an interesting thing to think about. What does all this come to? Or thinking through this, what kind of poems are going to happen? Most importantly, regardless of like establishing a verdict. So that's just an example of like what's interesting to me these days in poetry, thinking about poetry, thinking through it, making more poems. And it's a total discursive thing. It's a reflexive thing. Highly interesting. Like, I'm not an expert, but I need a different kind of motivation than publishing stuff. Because like that's a rush that lasts like a half a day. It's good to get a book out, but the high is short. And what is going to motivate you in the meantime, before, after? And so these kinds of ideas, these kinds of notions that maybe some people take for granted, or once you start to interrogate them, aren't so clear or cut and dry. This is like the kind of stuff that's interesting. And to me, thinking about and working through these things is, more of a sustainable motivator for making poems or making texts, And so, like, I think that relates to what you were saying, like just thinking conceptually, wondering, asking, answering, talking, I think these things need to be discursive.
Magic is always in the discourse. This is something that I often say when I talk about classes or anything of that nature. Is the magic really arises in that the word, if you want to really speak more fundamentally, like just remove the metaphysical bullshit from it, and we won't say magic at all. Just say the word, whatever that means, the logos even. That arises in dialogue. And so the more discursive, the more expansive through time and space dialogue is. It doesn't even have to be between the same two people as long as they're carrying the seeds of the ideas. That's really, that's the metaphysical secret of the universe, is like the story is the container, but there's something maybe more layered within it. And that in poetry is that. Like when you're speaking about it, there's almost a metaphysical grammar that you're not saying, but it's there. It's like you were even saying about form and style, and like I think every poet loves form and style because it's like it's everything, but then it's also nothing. So you can just break it, you can choose something else. And that's sort of what is also fun about poetry, is that even in a book, you can have two very different styles that are still interrelated through this discursive arrow, if you want to call it that. That's what I think. I don't know. Maybe that's too woo or meta, but yeah.
No, it's I agree with it. And what you said reminds me of concrete poetry. And so concrete poetry is like, does away with attitude, or style, Style to me is just your attitude, your position, in relation to other stuff, other attitudes and styles. That's just you're just positioning yourself that way, based on your temperament or your tastes at the time. But what concrete poetry does, I think, or enhances, that poetry doesn't enhance as much as like the graphical kind of relational and acoustic, so the graphic and acoustic relational qualities of a text, without attitude, without your position, without a so-called style, and to me that's like I like concrete poetry. Some people don't, but that's one thing I like about it. And you can, even if you're not, you don't identify as a concrete poet or make concrete poems, you can still take that from it. Yeah, like the metaphysical thing, I'm interested. So because you brought up that word a little bit. And so were you able to you were able to read this new book after Sunstone that I've had published?
I've read three, well, we'll say very specifically, I've read 3/4 of it. I've looked through all of it, but I've read 3/4 of it.
So
I have it right in front of me.
No,
So
yeah, that's all. Yeah, but no, like I don't doubt you did. But what I'm curious about is like, so if you're reading things through a metaphysical lens, then what did my texts offer that way to you? This is curious to me because I've never heard it before. I've never heard anyone.
So this is ultra challenging because you're right. Because first of all, you're a poet and you're an experienced poet. So there are different ways that you can use different motifs and hide them a little better. Like you were talking about the logographic quality of words. That is kind of what I was even trying to get at. So I thank you for saying that there is a logographic quality to having letters near each other that aren't even necessarily part of the same word. Maybe they're not even part of the same line. So I do notice those little things. I'm not saying that you did that, but those are the things I would notice, like two Ks near each other, a V here where maybe should be or shouldn't be. I like those little things. I'm not saying you did that. I'm
I might have.
thinking I'm
I might
just
have done
speaking.
it.
Well,
And
that's
then
fine.
Will might have done it too, because he set the type for the book. And sometimes it's a little well, sometimes it differed from the way I presented the work in manuscript form. So to me, that's one of the delights of printed poems. And that's one of the things you can't get by reading it out loud and someone not seeing it printed. And so that, to me, that's one of the things you miss in like a poetry reading, unless the audience has the book and they're following along. And so to me, that's like, I don't know. And like, as far as metaphysics go, like, I think that like probably there's a lot more metaphysics in poetry than maybe even poets would admit.
Absolutely. 100%. Everyone go read the Discordian Bible. The whole book is a book of poems. That's all it is. They say it's a book of magic. It's not. It's a book of poetry. Just, yeah, it's a little weird and dedicated to this goddess named Eris, but it really is just a book of poems. And if you read any Austin Osman Spare book, it's just books of poems. It's like maybe he drew a little image, then he's gonna, write a couple bars here and there. That's the poet is the magician in a very fundamental way. And I agree that a lot of poets are interested in, we'll just call it broadly, mystical ideas. Now, you did bring up Apcon before. Obviously, I've had J. David Osborne on the show, as well as Kelly Lutzak, definitely friend.
Oh, cool.
And so, I got into this with them too. I grilled them, Dustin. I was like, like both of you have a deep understanding, at least from my perspective, they seem to have a very strong grasp of metaphysics, magic, and sort of their role in the creation of the word, but not just maybe in their word, maybe in their own personal lives too. So that was also really interesting. But I think that poetry it kind of marries and this is just my opinion, so you can totally disagree with me.
Okay.
I think there's something about poetry fundamentally, and this is because I have an art history background. So
Yeah.
I had to take Sanskrit, unfortunately, as like an elective language class, but it wasn't elective because I had to take it. So Sanskrit's a very compound language. Everything is compounds. You can make new words very easily by doing compound words. We can't necessarily do that in English. But if you're talking about maybe aesthetic choices on the page, or even the way it's arranged, or even the numbers of lines, or the page number, you can actually I think you can start to put in a metaphysics, or maybe you replicate the metaphysics that is already present in reality. So what I'm saying is, I think the poet isn't necessarily the magician where he's like, I'm going to tame the polarities, conquer the dragon, ride to the top, exit the cube, etc. But I think the poet is fundamentally doing a magical operation, like through this kind of synthesis of words and ideas. And yes, I agree. Sound and poetry, it's not necessarily one to one. And I think people do overemphasize. But I do think that something you said was also interesting is that there is a phonetic quality where you don't have voice, you don't have perspectival, like it's not the poet speaking to you. It's the person reading it. It's them. There's kind of you said this, a reflexive action to certain kinds of poems. And I think in that, because perception is the number one magic. I mean, Marshall McLuhan always said that. It's like perception is the means of everything. It's like how you understand the world. So I think that, if the poem's speaking directly to you, but it's also your voice, I think that maybe is the apotheosis of like a magical operation. And this is just my opinion. I'm like I love poetry, I love art, I love all this stuff. So, and metaphysics, obviously. So for me, obviously, I'm very moved by these things. I find them to be higher experiences.
Okay. Well, this is interesting. So just a couple things, and I'd like to maybe comment on what you just said, because I kind of agree with it. But like when I said reflexive, so I think what you were interpreting it as reactive, like a reaction, but I didn't mean that. I meant reflexive in the sense of like, um, the work you're making is in itself critical of its form. That's what I mean by reflexive. But I don't not mean that there's a reaction, that there's a, so, but that's another conversation, the reflexivity. But in terms of reactions too, and you're talking about magical operations, or you're talking about like, you could kind of, to me, I get reminded of alchemy, like, so a poet can take a lot of different disparate things, like whether they be words, experiences, images, ideas, all of that, and kind of like just throw it in the crucible, as it were, and make some sort of something more out, something that's more than the sum of what it was made from, more than the sum of its parts, which is a kind of alchemy. And the same thing happens when we're talking about someone who's a very good reader, someone who reads creatively, does it too. So it's not just happening once, it's happening at least twice, ideally. And, I am fine with calling that magic or magical in some way, because it goes back to what I said about the idea of mysticism. To me, is like, you don't know where it's coming from and you don't know where it's going. Right. So I don't think it's a stretch to call it a magical operation, Jin. I don't think it's a stretch at all. I think it's like worth exploring, and I tend to agree with you, although I don't know about magic really. I wouldn't pretend to understand any of that. But everyone kind of know. It's funny, like, even if we don't know magic, or we don't know magic spells, or that's something that's like against our religion, or something, even if, all of the above or none of the above, even as a child, we know what magic is.
Mhm.
Right? So to me, magic is like getting back to almost the childlike in ourselves. Like, I think that's something a lot of people lose, unfortunately, as they get older and they turn into adults. Yeah, they lose that idea or sense of magic, of transformation, that like doesn't really have like a logical, that can't be explained completely in logical ways. I don't know. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's like something we lose sometimes? Like,
Yes.
yeah,
I mean, I
I
agree
never
to
thought of that before. I never thought of that before, but so thanks to you.
Well, I'm glad that I generated some seeds. I mean, I like to think of myself as like flexible. Like, I can speak to people like you, and then I can speak to like American magicians. It's no problem. Like, I don't speak their language either, really. I speak my own language in my own way, but I've had tantric Buddhists on the show as well, so I've had to learn to diversify and like speak many tongues, you could say, like you were talking about the mystery. I am always reminded of the Stephen Flowers book, like the Runa, and he translates Runa to mean the mystery. So I think,
Mm.
like, I'm not into the Norse stuff, just like for the record, but there is something very poetic about how he sort of analyzes the construction of the Germanic or the Norse runes. So, and
Okay.
how he kind of envisions how they came to be created. So
Cool.
I think that and they say like the runes sort of come from Wotan or Odin, and it's like from the smoky place, and they're like how I liken it in Buddhism. So I'll just use my framework because I think it's more cogent and I more believe it, though maybe that's more authentic. So it comes from like the carnal ground is how I would say it. Like the
Okay.
actual cremation ground where a body is buried or not buried, burned. There's a there's a sort of ritual timing to the different processes of the stages of cremation. And if you understand the final stage is right before dawn, it's not at dawn, it's right before dawn, right when it's like the embers are just burning and it's like the smoke is just just it's just light. It's just like maybe there's like a mist, maybe it's a little cloudy, like the hazy, just pre-morning colors. And so the idea is like that's flux. So there are particulates in that matter that are real, but they're not usable as they are. And so the idea for a magician or a poet, both, this is a more tantric idea, but they would sort of take of those particulates, which are really empty. I think you've even described poetry as empty, if I remember correctly, in an interview, Dustin. Um, yeah, it has the word has a fundamental empty quality. Now, what is empty? Now, different people have different ideas of this. For me, how I would describe it is emptiness is masslessness and luminousness. So it's something hidden, mysterious, but also it has its own spark, you could call it. So it's up to the discerner or the person looking at it to sort of decide how am I going to place this in a grammar. And like you said, there is something breaking convention. Maybe that's what I like about poetry is it can break its own conventions within the same work. It can
Mm-hmm.
say, this is the logic I set forth, but I'm going to change it up here.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a much more tantric idea is that you can remix ritual grammars together. So if you're like looking at the comparison with that, you're just talking about words fundamentally, just talking about arranging the pattern of Sanskrit to this page or the whatever colloquial language you're using to write poetry. And you're basically talking about the same thing, just remixing different ways of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that process is the alchemy, is like the great work of, everybody loves the hero. And I love the hero too, in a way, and I love the anti-hero as well, and maybe sometimes the villain, and I think there's room for all of that. But I really think that there is something fundamental about the act of being in co-creation with the word. I'm really into this idea. I know I've kind of spoken about this at the beginning a little, but I just think that that is maybe the more fundamental magic experience or the more fundamental creative experience or the creative expression. Like we were talking
Mm-hmm.
about how film is super, you can encode a lot of like esoterica. Just go watch any 70s film, any 70s Italian film. There's
Mm-hmm.
so much like OTO stuff. There's so much Golden Dawn stuff. There's so much of like that sort of like Kenneth Grant stuff. It's so obvious to anyone who's familiar. But poetry gives us the opportunity to like remix what came before. We don't have to be married to any, old fashioned thing. Yeah, we might be interested in sonnets, but maybe we're using modern words. So it just gives, I think it just is more interesting. I think from my perspective, who is like a little bit more of a chaos magician in origin, I think it appeals to me on that level. It's just that you can play with it. Like you were talking about how we lose that sense of play. Poetry is all about play, no matter, well, maybe you don't agree, Dustin, and that's okay. But I think that it fundamentally is about play. It's about the interplay between the words. Now, play doesn't necessarily have to mean fun or levity or light, but it can mean, it's talking about relationships. I think that's what this whole discussion between you and I has really fundamentally been about is we talked about treaty relationships, but it's also about like what defines that space between the emptiness. I would say it's love, but different people have different, again, ways to describe it.
Well, I think like, yeah, the idea of play to me like goes back to this idea of like the magic of childhood. And like, I brought up forms and stuff like sonnets and blank verse, heroic couplets. Like the guy who edited after Sunstone, Tom Will, who, like I said, is a brilliant poet. Excellent. And he's my friend, and he works with these forms a lot. And yeah, he's using, you could argue it's contemporary diction, but not always. I think he does some really interesting things with syntax that are unexpected. And I see his work as like very playful, and not in a, I don't say that in a, like a derogatory way at all, like that he's messing around. Not at all. It's just that I see him as someone who, um, is letting things kind of happen, like pushing things around, seeing kind of what they do, putting something here, seeing what it does. Like he just kind of like, he's like very playful in that way. But not in an unserious way. It's not unserious at all. He's serious and he's interesting. But the fact that he can make these forms work that are really difficult to work with, and I don't really have a knack for it. And I don't do that. But he does, and it seems like, he's able to play with his ideas and language within the form and make something work that's really interesting and new. So they're often like, they're kind of outmoded. They're like ossified forms sometimes, like almost resurrected. But he brings them back to life, through his poetic consciousness. And to me, that's like to me, he's the best example of play, in like the most serious way. Like, when children play, they're serious about it. And magic can happen. Like, as far as like words go and the magic within words, it seems like that's only the case. It seems like that's happens when like the poetry is going, like, to me, like I like Robert Duncan's idea where, like, the poetry is kind of there already, and it's kind of like it's like a mountain spring. It's kind of working its way through the stone, just like, like it works your way through language and images, and like like Duncan would have it, I think, that a poem is already there. Like poetry is like a cosmic force, and that like it works its way through our language, our storehouse of images, our bodies, our nervous system. And then, sometimes, you get actual poems. And so this is maybe different from what you're saying, but I think it's still interesting.
It's not that different. All the words are free. I totally agree with you. Like we're drawing from that ether, that like smoky place, if you want to call it that.
Mhm.
And we're drawing those sparks of potential forward. And then we're
Mhm.
saying, I'm using we, but it's really not directed about me. It's but people who are poets, and they're fundamentally drawing from that place. And so it's up to the poet's consciousness, as you so eloquently called it, to discern how they're going to place the words that they're sort of drawing from, or place
Mhm.
even the ideas. Maybe it's not even words. Maybe it's just ideas that aren't manifest.
Yeah. And to me, like with Tom Will's poetry, like he slaps a form on top of that, and it's even more difficult. So the fact that he can pull it off is like, shows the skill and the knowledge, the dedication. Um, Yeah. And like, I've talked about this before like, for me, like that's almost always the case. I need a first line. It's got to be a good one. And then the poem kind of comes out of that. It's sort of like it's born out of that. Um, it's that's the genesis of the whole poem, is that first line. And I don't know what, to me, this is some of the mystery in it. It's just like, well, why this line? And why is there a poem in that one line unfolding out of it? Like, it's very unusual experience to be a poet. Like, I can't think of anything more commercially. It's like poets are sort of like commercial outsiders. They're not really like involved in the economy in any real way. Like there is buying and selling of manuscripts and finished books and stuff. And so it does exist in the economy, but very, very peripherally. And so that the poem, this is what I like about it, is the poem is like, it's no more or less than what it is, as a thing, printed on a page. It's like, and like, there's no quantifiable plus value, if you want to use a Marxist term. And I don't even know much Marx, but that's the idea, right? That's how he sort of describes capital, like, whereas a poem is just no more or no less than what it is. In any situation, whether it's in someone else's head or it's in the poet's head. But regardless of that, it wasn't there before, or it was, but it was not manifest. And maybe this is coming back to this idea of magic. Magic is magic often, whether you know a lot about it or not, usually something's manifested that wasn't there before. Right?
This is the great paradox. Yeah, this is the great paradox, Dustin. What is magic? And like, how do you quantify it or qualify it, both or neither?
Mhm.
Different people have different ideas, but I would say that the poem's manifest nature, as you're positing, I agree with that. I think that its nature is self-evident, if you want to use a cliche. I think that it exists is sort of the both proof of that magic, or that there's something, we won't use magic, we'll say something more than just our mundane reality. But then also it's there's an encodedness or a secret nature, you could say, to it, that is talking to other people who maybe have access at times, or even in brief glimpse, maybe just through the poem itself. It's like a portal almost. It kind of tells you, like a metaphysic or hermeneutic, to say, oh yes, you kind of touched on the same experience. You kind of understand, like, there's a place where the words are empty and they are formless, and they kind of come together in your mind, and maybe other people recognize that, and I think they do. And I think you're right, a poet is a natural outsider, a natural hermeticist, if you want to call it that. And you were even talking about how your friend uses very difficult formal styles. This is something that I discuss, is like, we have to still rely on traditional texts and practices, because that is the corpse, that is the corpus. But we also have to lift the corpus from, simply institutional containers that are no longer able to sort of understand, practice, or contain them. So you have to kind of lift it and make it new. And you're right, it's a very serious endeavor. That's one thing I really appreciated when you said that, because I was like, yeah, like I'm calling myself a chaos magician, saying, yeah, it's all about play. And, because I'm not a kid, but I'm going to say, like, I'm still a kid like that. But if you're a grown
Mhm.
up, like a grown up magician, you're actually like a grown up where you're going to be like, yes, I'm going to actually make conscious decisions of the will to place things in specificity here, here, and here to make sure that all the angles align for myself. To make sure that reality then aligns to what I want. So
Mhm.
that's just the difference. Just like I'm a monkey, and your friend is like just a broader sage than I am. So all is fired to that. One day.
Well, that's what Ezra Pound said. Make it new. Ezra Pound said that. Make it new.
Well, I am a Ezra Pound fan, so I'm not gonna lie.
Well, like, I don't know, that can mean a lot of different things, right? But it relates to what you're talking about, like, tradition, if you don't do anything with tradition or you don't do anything new with it, it like, it dries up and dies, so, um, there's like a kind of, there's like a sort of tension in tradition. There's the conservative side of it where you want to maintain what it is and and um what's the word, like, preserve it.
Mhm.
And then there's like the progressive side of it, I guess, where you want to uh innovate based on it. In order to innovate, you need something to innovate from, right? So there's like this tension between a sort of conservatism and like a kind of progressivism in the traditional, and like um to me, like, I don't really know enough. I don't think I know enough about poems or poetry to be in any way traditional. Like, you know, I've
I think
only
reading.
just, yeah,
Sorry,
I've
Dustin.
only, that's okay. I've just been, um, just reading and writing for a long time, and like, I, I've said this before, I haven't really lived a very good life, you know, um, I'm only, now try, trying to do better, be better. Mm. And so I've like um had a lot to deal with. And so like sometimes you deal with things with your writing. Sometimes you escape from what things you need to deal with in your writing. I don't see it as like a kind of therapy or anything like that. But yeah, the the traditional side of things, like, to me, is like, I don't know, I actually like have a lot of respect for it. Like when people know a lot, like, about what they're doing, like a classical musician, like a classical pianist who knows like all the piano literature, all of it, you know, knows exactly where they are in it, you know, can orient themselves that way. To me, that's like a really interesting thing. I never really had the patience for it. I was just like always like picking up whatever was curious to me at the time. And like, so when you talk about like being like a tantric Buddhist, um, and I have another friend, he's not a tantric Buddhist, but he is a Buddhist. I'm not sure exactly sure the denomination, but it's it's like it's a lot of work to learn about these traditions. They're old, they're deep, like, and it's just, you just become dedicated to it. There's like, when I always think of like humility, humbleness in Buddhism, and like to really like be a serious Buddhist and learn the tradition of like the path you're following in Buddhism is like, I think like, you know, getting like, a whole stack of humble pies shoved down your throat, like there's like a lot in that, it makes it would make you feel pretty small. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like if you're a
yeah.
Christian or like, yeah, like if you're like a Christian and, you want to study theology and then like you see all the church fathers, weighing heavy on the library shelves, you're just like, whoa, like, so, I have a lot of respect for all that. It's just that I'm kind of more, I just go about these things maybe somewhat differently. I don't know even how, but it's just like thinking about stuff, thinking about problems, aesthetic problems and stuff like more. I see myself more as like a contemporary artist than like a poet or a novelist or something. Like I I know a lot of artists, like a lot of my friends are painters and stuff, and they've gone to art school, done graduate degrees in art school, like, and I'm like probably most influenced by these people, these friends of mine, but like how I go about my creative practice, like, it's, yeah, that's kind of where I come from in it all. But sorry, I keep going on you, man.
No, this is part of the discursive mode of the show, Dustin. So you're perfectly in line with how I like to conduct an episode. I've had an amazing time. I will say, for a short time, I won't say specifically what city it was, but I was a little bit of a notorious train marker.
Oh yeah.
Tiger. I'm not a great painter. I'm the first to say it, but I actually I did a welding course just so I could do a welding like art practice. I'm not great or anything. I don't think I am. I don't sell anything. It's just for me. But
Yeah.
I felt like I needed a material art practice to sort of, I don't know, like kind of root me to wherever I am. And that's just the medium I like. But to be honest, I also love the words. And I also think that in many ways, I love that you called yourself a contemporary artist because that is more how I think of poetry. I think actually good poetry is much more closely related almost to visual art than
Mhm.
it is necessarily to like the literary word. And I think that that's not a negative. And I also agree that it can also exist within the tension between those two things. So I thought that was interesting that you use that word specifically, just because it's an idea that I've been thinking about a lot is the strength and tension, which is also replicated in a sentence structure because you can have different tensions depending on, how you can join or, uh, your syntactical choices. You can make internal tensions. So,
Oh yeah.
I-
Oh
right.
yeah.
So this. I think that this is something really interesting, just from a like a you could say just a linguistic perspective. Like our language is so layered. Language is so it's a manifold in its reality. It can just be expansive infinitely.
Mhm.
And it is kind of also the fundamental technology too is the word.
Oh
So
yeah.
I think
I
that
agree
once
with that.
right? So,
I agree with that.
you know,
Yeah.
people like to they're worshiping the AI of the future now and or whatever. And I'm like, we have it. We have everything. It's in the word, just like, study the word and you're all good. But so you brought up the thing about Buddhism, just and I just wanted to respond to that. It was really
Mhm.
interesting simply because you're right. Tibetan Buddhism occupies, or Tantra generally will say it occupies about three-fourths of my brain.
Yeah.
So like all the, sadhana practices, all the nonfiction, all the commentaries, all the actual root text, all of that's mostly in my brain.
Mhm.
But it's really interesting because sadhanas are actually written in poetic style. They're written in poetic meter. They're written in, like, obviously using Tibetan conventions, but they fulfill a lot of components of poetry, in fact, and they even sound very poetic because they describe like very insane, sometimes phenomena that you may see. And it
Yeah.
also, and then there were later composers of the same, you could say the same or similar texts, and they broke with tradition. They made it a lot more minimalist. They were like, we're gonna break right here. And so it is interesting because even though my worldview is much more based in this more fundamentally what is traditional, it has all these conventions and these movements that you see also in Western literature or just maybe um, poetry ad hoc.
Mhm. Well, yeah, that's interesting. Like I'm not I think I'm kind of I think I'm familiar with what you're talking about. Um and if I'm not mistaken, the reason why these things are metrical or versified, um, or formal, are like formalized, um, is probably partly to do with because they have to be memorized. Am I wrong? Makes them more memorizable.
If you're a really good practitioner, so not me, you will have the whole sadhana memorized, like the whole liturgical prayer memorized. But if
Okay.
you're a 21st century young former chaos magician, maybe you look at it a little differently and you say, okay, I'm going to read the sadhana, the liturgical part, the metrical lyrical part. But because what is the primary importance in any sadhana is sort of either root mantra or the
Mhm.
sort of primordial seeds that just have sound, but they're sort of lacking traditional meaning. They don't really
Okay.
have a formal meaning. In like, no one could go and read those words and say, this is what this means. There's no meaning like that. It's an inner and secret meaning.
Okay.
It's like a one line. Like you were talking about, this is the perfect example. You gave that great example of the first line of a poem. You can
Yeah.
say that the mantra is kind of even though it might appear in the middle, it's kind of the first line of of the whole prayer. It's the most fundamental component. It's the violence. And I'm using that in a positivistic way. Violence is
Okay.
in that is the thing that penetrates consciousness. That is the thing that grabs your attention. That is the thing
Yeah.
that you should know what it looks like internally, not just on the
Mhm.
page.
It-
So I think we're saying the
okay.
same thing. I'm just, I'm meandering along sort of the
No, no,
comparative
no, no, no. I like that.
framework.
No, that's excellent. No, that makes me think about all that even more now in a new way. So I'm happy to hear that. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, of course. I won't keep you that much longer, but I have to ask you about this simply. But William Gibson and MFA programs in the city. Do you have any
Yeah.
thoughts on that? Or you can even just comment on the sort of notion you've touched on this before, but the idea of cyberpunk and sort of the Vancouver utopia dystopia sort of dichotomy that place specifically exhibits.
Well, there's two things okay, so William Gibson. Okay. William Gibson, I like have a story about how I got into William Gibson. So I was like living in Montreal in like 2005 for a little while, like for about 6 months. And think I found a copy. I'm not sure if I had read Neuromancer yet, but I found another one of his novels. And then I went back. I was back in I was staying with my family before I moved to Vancouver. And my mom was working at the college then and had up until recently had worked at the college. The library had almost all of his novels. And so I was like sort of hunkered down in Alberta in the winter, and I was like binge reading all of William Gibson's novels. And I loved him. Like I got used to his formula. Like he sort of has he sort of like leaned on a certain formula in his like narratives. Like it was like always like 3 different narrative strands, and they would all kind of like coalesce at the end. Like he kind of did that every time. Like, so you got used to the way he told stories and stuff, but I really loved like Neuromancer, Virtual Light, All Tomorrow's Parties, like Idoru, those ones. I just
I love
loved
Idoru.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just
Pro-
want to say that that's an underloved Gibson novel, Idoru.
Yeah.
I highly recommend it. It's one of my favorites personally.
Yeah, it's awesome. And like, I'd like to read it again just to refresh it in my mind. But like, so yeah, then shortly after that, I moved to Vancouver and stayed there for a number of years. And like, and I was actually just there recently last week, for a couple days on my way back from Mexico. And like, yeah, like the whole cyberpunk thing in Vancouver, it's a little washed now, to tell you the truth. Like, it's not really what it was. I think there was like a time when it was just dirty enough, and there was still some new shit too, where it was like kind of felt like that. But now it's like really very gentrified. And like my old neighborhood, Mount Pleasant, it's like all tech bros, it seems. Like maybe I'm wrong, but like seems like it. I don't know who these guys are. They look like tech bros, but I could be wrong. Yeah, so now it's kind of like it's more like, what's the word to explain it? It's like, it's too homogenous now. And there's like too many murals. They had the mural fest a bunch of years in a row. So it's like there's murals everywhere. And it's just like, oh, these things suck. Like these aren't even good. Like, I don't want to see this. Like, I don't like this. Why do I have to see this image? Why is it huge on the wall? And so the aesthetic of Vancouver is like not really, what it once was. It's like kind of washed and homogenized. And then like, but the idea of like cyberpunk to me is cool and like maybe more legit than ever. Like I'm working on, I have a remote job. It's pretty slow. Like I do teaching and tutoring online, but I'm trying to get another like second remote job, because like I've been trying to do the digital nomad thing for like 6-7 months, and I had some things to take care of back here. Before I go out and try that again. But I want to, because like, I think like this is like kind of like more like Neuromancer, like you got your laptop and you're just like going from place to place, like doesn't matter, like if you don't have a family, like I don't have any kids or anything, I'm single. So like I can kind of just like, if I can afford it, like if I can make money when I'm out there, then there's no real limits. Like, like I want to go to like, I want to check out like some different places. Like I really want to go to Africa. Like I want to go more places in Latin America and keep, learning more Spanish. But like, I'd love to go to South Africa, and like, I'd like to go to like, some of these huge big cities in Africa and stuff. Like, I think there's like one in Nigeria. I'm trying to remember what it's called, but it's like as big as Mexico City. Lagos, yeah, Lagos. And like, then there's like, and Mexico City. I don't know if you've ever been there, but I was just there, and I've been there. It's just like, to me, it's like crazy. It's like
I like it.
chaotic, man. And like, it's like next level. It's next level, man. And like, I really want to go to Tokyo and
I'd love
different
to.
places in Asia and stuff like that. So, you know, yeah, like, so to me, like, how like in Neuromancer, like they're kind of just, they're here, they're there, they're on a space station, like they're really the you know, space and time are totally collapsed or collapsible now. And to me, that's like the most cyberpunk thing about like 2025. Like, this meaningful conversation we had, it's just on a computer screen, but it's got full of life, full of dimension or dimensions. Yeah. That's cyberpunk, man.
And Hipper's 10. Cyber magic.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah,
what
cyber
Yethro wrote
magic.
the book, and he cites Gibson as like an influence of why he wrote that book, Liber Chaos and Liber
Mhm.
Cyber. And
Okay.
the reality is like, yeah, all of these things are kind of, they all interface in our consciousness. So I agree with you. I agree with you, Dustin. Like, we are the node, so go out there and do what you want to do. Go rock and roll.
Yeah, if you can. Yeah, like
Yeah, if you
I'm
can.
I'm a little yeah, like I'm stalled out right now, but hopefully not for long. Yeah, like I said, I had to come back and take care of a few things before I go out on it, on another adventure. But no, it's like I was very, very uh like, what's the word? Like, I was the whole remote thing. I was kind of like very suspicious of it, pre-COVID. And after being after lockdown and stuff like that, and like, and then I started working online, and like just being online, terminally online, and just getting more used to it. To me, the remote thing is the way to go. Like, I know some people, they like their routine, they like their little commute every day, they like to get out and stuff, but that has limits too. So like, working remote, it's sort of like there's different things like that are better about it. Like, yeah.
I totally
I-
agree with you. I think like you touched on it, like the gentrification of Vancouver push, like, but it's the same. It's like every major Canadian city is exactly the same. That are cool. Obviously, not all of them are cool, but
Yeah.
the ones that used to have like actual artists, writers, people who are creatives, we'll say
Mhm,
generally filmmakers,
mhm,
because that's a big part of, at least it was a big part of the formal economy here for a long time.
mhm.
Really fundamental. You can look at so many American shows are filmed in Vancouver or
Yeah.
Toronto or both.
X
And so
X-Files was
that's
filmed,
right.
at my university, SFU.
Battlestar
And,
Galactica. I always say
yeah,
Battlestar Galactica, just like
yeah,
all of New Caprica is basically like an Arthur Erickson.
yeah,
It's basically like a tour of all the best mid-century buildings in Vancouver. So, um,
yeah. No,
well, they pushed us out. So we went to the periphery, went back to the rural. I like it personally. I like the quiet. I like the rural. I'm good with it. But I agree, like there's a big world and there's a big continent to explore and many things to do and many words to find, maybe. But
yeah.
this was an amazing conversation. I really appreciate it, Dustin.
Oh, you're welcome. I appreciate it too. I like to keep, like, I think like I maybe it's because of I'm got moved around a little bit more than usual when I was young, when I was a young kid. But like, I like to keep moving. I like to be on the move a bit. It's inspiring to me. I don't know why. Like it just new fresh. It just refreshes everything. Um, I got really like what's the word? I got really sedentary when I was in Vancouver. And I was like, there's got to be more to life than this. Like, this is fine and stuff, but it's not that good anymore. And like, this can't be it. This can't be the end. And that's what I was thinking. And it's not, because, well, like most importantly, my new book after Sunstone, published by Farthest Heaven. And then I have 2 novels that have been published. One is called Run the Bead, published by Soyos Books in 2023. And you can find that on Asterism. That's the distributor, Asterism. And I'll give you that link. And then my debut novel is called Notice. And that's a Vancouver book. And that was published by Nightwood Editions. And I'll give you the link for that too. Just first of all, thank you very much for having me on as a guest. And
I'm
contacts.
I'm legit honored.
Yeah, well, my contacts too, like at the publisher or at the press and stuff, will retweet this and support this conversation for sure.
Thank you so much, Dustin. Your links will be in the bottom. His poetry is beautiful. I highly recommend it. I'm so glad you came on. I'm so glad that you were okay to speak to me, who is not, I'm not really part of the indie alt-lit Twitter. I'm kind of peripheral to them, but I know all of them. Like we've all follow each other, but, I'm not really in it. So I appreciate that you took the time to speak to me and specifically and that you came on my show. And honestly, I'm honored. I do consider it kind of like a millennial e-zine, hipster e-zine, dragging our archive back from the late 90s, early 2000s. But so it's a true honor, and I'm really glad that I got to speak to I find you to be very fascinating, because I understand much of what you're saying, but in my own obviously lens. And I think it is interesting how the points of synthesis, how similar it is, and also like how much both ideas actually can work together. So thank you again,
Yeah.
Dustin. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome, Jin. My pleasure.